Hi everyone, I'm Rajesh Singhi. I'm Distinguished Engineer and CTO for Digital Behavior Data Management at IBM. And our mission at IBM for our area is to create, collect, manage, and deliver the user behavior data to our marketers, digital sellers, and product managers so that they can design our products, user experience for our sites in such a way that we can keep them engaged with our product and services, and also create a positive buzz about the IBM brand. And to do that, where we started and where we have come, where we started and where we have come has been a roller coaster ride for us. We started with something that was a very chaotic environment, and we'll talk about that. From there, adopting Tealium for tag management, and life became good. Seeing the possibilities, we decided to stretch further Tealium product and thought about extending it to classify the data using tag management. And that worked well, but didn't really scale. And then this data layer API that Mike talked about this morning came to our rescue. And not only it solved the problems that we had, but it also leapfrogged us into cognitive era. So now we can not only use the data that we are collecting about our users just to classify and analyze and report, but we are able to use some of this information using our Watson API and change the user experience and the behavior at runtime. So we'll talk about that. So a little bit about IBM. IBM is a 100-year-old global corporation, and with that privilege, we get a very complex legacy environment. We have several business lines, and we are going through acquisitions. We have about 150 offsite domains that we have to manage, 4 plus content management systems, and we serve 50 million plus users, and these are just users. We don't include IBMers and bots, and we are measuring our metrics. And when we are serving this type of environment, managing the data that we are collecting through this in a consistent fashion and making it available to our marketers so that they can analyze to see what journeys are effective, where we are losing our users, what behavior is resulting into conversion, what behavior is resulting in abandonment, was very important. But the way we were structured was not making it very easy for us to do it. Everything was done in a decentralized way. Each business unit have their own content management teams. They were putting the tags on the pages. There were some standards around look and feel, but there were no standards around how we collect the data, how we place the tags. And as a result, when you are looking at the holistic picture, it was very difficult to get the full picture of the site. Most of our marketers were frustrated with the lack of ability to see the full picture end to end, what's happening on the site for their product. 1 month they are getting full picture, but somebody made some changes to the content, and then site analytics tag disappeared, and they are not seeing the data. We heard some of these stories earlier today, and that was very familiar scenario. So we said, we need to fix that, and that's where our journey started with Tealium and with our transformation. So as we embraced Tealium, we said, okay, we need to do 3 things. First, we need to standardize the data, standardize the tags, and then we need a very standard process for deploying those tags for entire site. And we looked at several solutions, and Tealium stood out. So we went with Tealium, and it didn't disappoint us. Within 2 months of signing a contract, we had Tealium up and running for entire sites, all 143 domain, We had a single repository of all the tags. So we could say, these are the standard tags. You don't get to choose what you put on the pages, right? That didn't stop anybody from putting the rogue tags, but that's a different story. We had a centralized management. That means instead of people have to go to different teams to put the tags, now they come to us, right? And there's one place to put the tags in a consistent fashion. We had standard. So from where we were, where it was very hard to get the reliable metrics, let alone using that data for understanding journey, defining the audiences, we went from there to having a very reliable way of getting the site analytics, using that information to derive the audiences, and using those audiences, making some decision about running the campaigns, right? And life was good. The deployment of Tealium was huge success. And with that success came the excitement and new demand. So our marketers who had a challenge of trusting the data, so a lot of time they were spending deciding the data that they were getting was accurate, can they rely on that data and use that data to create cohort, run the campaigns. Now, didn't have to worry about the accuracy of the data. After 2 months after deployment, we were able to show that day in, day out, they are able to get the data consistently, right? So now the focus shifted from validating the data to analyze the data and what does that data tell you and how can you use data in different ways. And I soon learned the marketers are very creative people. They found many, many ways to analyze the content. And for that, they had to classify the data. So how do you classify? And at that time, people would say, okay, put a tag. Okay, that's not the tag in the tag management context, right? That's the label. But who would do it? Oh, there is a centralized tag management team. Let's go to them. They will do it. And that's how we started getting the request for classifying the content that they couldn't do it through CMS, right? Do it through the Tealium. And well, we were excited. We were successful. What can go wrong, right? So we said, okay, we will do that. So we took 10,000 pages, work with Tealium. We say, okay, let's put some kind of a tool because we are going to get this data every week. So let's put some plugin so we can load this in Tealium as load rules or tags. And that worked well. We saw some inflation in the UTAG files, not too big, right? Same thing with the marketing tags or remarketing tags. Now people can come to one place, give their URLs and say put these tags and we could start running the remarketing campaigns, right? That demand grew. And with that demand, we had a problem of adding the tags very quickly. Again, we standardize on the template, give us a URL, give the tag, and we load it, right? Now, doing it manually was harder, so Tealium built us plugin. Now, all this looked very good. First 2 months, again, 2 months were a very happy period. We didn't have much volume. Automation was in place. There was no backlog. People would send us a file. Well, the data, new classification data is available. Marketers are happy because they are seeing a new way of analyzing the data. And this is where we started seeing a challenge. As the word spread, hey, this is a cool way of analyzing the data, running the campaigns, the demand grew significantly. Instead of having 10,000 URLs for classification, we got 500,000 URLs for classification. Okay. Instead of having 50 tags per week for remarketing, we started getting 600-700 tags. And at one point, we were about 25,000 tags to be put on different pages. And using this and just loading this and generating if-then-else code for in the Tealium started creating a different type of problem. What used to be a 200, 300K payload for our site for the Tealium became 2-3 MB, right? And imagine the impact of that. Site performance goes down. As site performance goes down, your page ranking for the searches go down because that's what Google uses or Bing uses, right? Particularly for mobile devices, we started seeing a very high bounce rate because pages won't load, right? We were seeing constant complaint from our business unit leaders about the low engagement rate, low conversion rate, because we slowly started seeing the downward trend. And not to say, because of these high payloads and the complex code that was generated by these plugins, our development cycles becoming bigger, debugging became harder, and it wasn't the best time. It was an operational nightmare for us. So we turned back again to Tealium and say, and that's what Mike was mentioning, those 45-minute the conversation we had about. And that's when Mike came back after that conversation a week later and said, we have a solution. Tealium is working on this concept called data layer API, where you are separating the data from the logic. And you can put that data in a high performance, low latency CDN, and then you can use that anyway to programmatically update on that CDN, consume it, runtime, and use that data to change the behavior of your page, whether it's a classification of the data or whether it's a firing the tag based on the event, right? And that's where we had an aha moment. We said, okay, if we can do this, why worry about having this team send us a spreadsheet of the classification data that we can load? Why do we worry about having them send a spreadsheet of tags to be deployed? Why don't we create a front end where our marketers can just go set up their classification data themselves? So we make sure that they know what they are entering, it's valid. Same thing for the tag, and use the API to push that configuration information to the CDN, use that CDN data runtime to change the page behavior, and all of a sudden, instead of having army of people doing this classification data, loading it, debugging it, promoting it, it becomes a self-service environment. As we were talking about what possible it is, we heard from the folks who were on the cognitive side said, if you can give me a way to classify the data, I can inject the data, runtime, and now you have a different behavior you can collect based on a new classification. So that started becoming a reality. So once we implemented this solution, we immediately saw a huge change, and we are into 4 months of this implementation, and I'll tell you what used to be 20 to 30 defects reported each week, we have a 0 defects since last 4 months. What used to be a constant complaint, if something is going wrong on any part of our site, we would say, people would come to us and say, it must be Tealium, right? And I'm sure some of you probably have heard that as well, right? For last month or so, after initial reaction that, yeah, it can't be Tealium, last month or so, we don't hear anything about it. We have our engineer on the call when it is serve 1, but he's the last one to be asked, is there anything you have done? Because we haven't changed the code. I mean, that's what you will see when Juan takes you through some of the details. You will see that our implementation took the changes, code changes completely away. We have one runtime engine that just reads the data from the CDN as a configuration, and based on the configuration, runs the tag, turns on things, turns off things, right? So that's just, that simplicity brought the scalability, automation, performance, and all of a sudden, what was a good ride, then became a nightmare, now has become a good ride again. Now, that's where now we are seeing the future a little bit differently. Now, this is opening us a way for us to push the data the way we never thought. We talked about some of the cognitive areas. Now, we have an initiative underway where we are taking the page content using Alchemy API from Watson and classifying the data based on the content to say which industries belong to, what type of audience or the interest it has. So that now, instead when we are implementing Tealium Audience Stream, we can classify and create the badges based on the interest of the people, rather than saying, okay, if user go to product A, B, and C, it must be developer. So now we are really going based on the user interest and behavior, and that's how the rest of the world looks at themselves, right? So that's a big move for us. The another one is, because of this data, now we can think about different ways of personalization with that we could not think about, right? So, how we did it, how we have got to this result, how simple it is to implement, is to tell you that our senior digital engineer, Juan Leon.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. So let me get started and give you a sense of how the implementation of tag management in IBM was done, considering the two biggest requirements that we had. The one was, how do we enable the marketing programs to deploy tags on different pages, and also how do we enable the data classification that we needed to standardize and normalize across IBM. So considering that, the first stage of our deployment was very centralized, was basically out-of-the-box Tealium implementation. And what we were looking at is, we had the marketing agency that, based on the marketing programs, they wanted to define what tags or what pixels we want to enable to the different URLs. And within that, then they wanted to provide information for each of the URLs of what was needed for the different tags. And they will provide this on a spreadsheet. And usually they will have, when they got very excited, they will have like 600 of these records being sent to us every week, or even more, sometimes in the thousands. So the spreadsheet was the mechanism that they would use, and this was a manual process that they had. Now this one, they will send the spreadsheet to our operations team, and then the operations teams will basically get the spreadsheet and load that into Tealium based on a custom solution that was built for us by Tealium. Basically, that was a bulk uploader, as they call it, that will read every single line from the spreadsheet and load that data into the environment. And what they will do is, they will look into the information that was coming on the spreadsheet in terms of the URLs. We have a bunch of domains. So they will classify the data based on those domains. And then the information associated with the tags, they will create extensions for that, right? So we'll send all the data over and into Tealium, do all the testing, and this is all the manual testing to verify that every tag was working properly and all the pixels were basically deployed. This information then was published into our production environment. Now, because of the process that we had, right, that for every domain, you will have a tag, and within that domain, you'll have the extension that will have each of the URLs with the data that was needed to enable the tag, then the number of tags that we had in the system was very large. So basically, we have over 1,100 tags in the system. And what this created is a process where you will have too much information in the main JavaScript for Tealium. And you'll have then all the other information in the extensions that needed to be sent over to the browser. Now, this is the process that we had for the enablement of the marketing programs. The second one that we needed to do, and was based on the same solution basically, is how to load the data for the classification. So it was the same process. We had a spreadsheet. That information was sent over into the operations team, and that information was loaded into Tealium with the same mechanism. So we have a lot of tags that will define based on the domains or the URL pattern, and then based on that, you'll have the extension that will have all the information that you wanted to override while the page was being loaded to the user. So that basically created a big file that needed to be sent when the user will come to any of the IBM pages. So the user will come over, and we will call Tealium, and a huge file with all these hundreds of thousands, or these many hundreds of thousands, these many thousands of rules that needed to be evaluated to determine what tags needed to be loaded is something that we had. So it was a huge file that we needed to fetch from the CDN. So this is about over 3 megabytes of data that were flowing over, along with all the other information that we needed to get from the extensions. So this basically created an environment that was very difficult for people to get to the pages because there was a lot of delay in getting all the data. And also, we had the problem of ranking of the pages by the search engine. So because of all this information that was loaded, first, to evaluate which tags were going to be executed, and second, once we knew which tags were executed, we needed to get extensions for the specific tag for that specific domain, and that created a lot of problems in terms of the overall performance. Now, this, the biggest issue that we had on this one was, from the operational perspective, is that we were getting about 600 requests on a weekly basis, but we always were behind schedule, and usually 2 weeks behind schedule all the time. And this is because most of the process was manual, and because of that, we had too many defects. So pixels were not firing. We have problems of URLs not existing. So we had URLs that basically became links to something else, and things were not firing at the moment. We had a complete team focused on evaluating or focused on supporting this whole process. So we have almost 4 people involved in that. As I mentioned, the page performance were very low, and as well as the SEO. And we were not able to scale this process. We needed to have more information being sent. We needed to have more classification data. We needed to expand beyond the 400,000 pages that were the most important in IBM. We have over 24 million pages, so we needed to scale this. So one of the things that we did based on the data layer API is we went back and redesigned our whole process. We redesigned our solution for tag management, and we started looking at how to decentralize this evaluation of the rules. In order to do that, we took advantage of the new technology that was brought up by Tealium, which is a data layer API. So we'll be able to publish information over to the page runtime. The second thing that we did, and this is, I think, is one of the most important aspects of this, is that we needed to sit down and understand the behavior that we wanted to have on the pages, right? What are the events that we were interested on that will drive the execution of pixels in our pages within IBM? And so we found and defined the standards for 4 different type of events. One that defines as page views. So any of the page load. We have the page clicks on any of the buttons or links that you have in the page. And we needed to get the conversion. So if there was a conversion, we wanted to know whether that started or completed. And also, we wanted to be part of the check-in, check-out process. And this is the purchase type of events. So those are the 4 events that we needed to define. We defined the standards for them and what information we wanted to capture. So we will send that information over to the pixels that were enabled for retargeting. The last thing that we needed to do is how to tell Tealium, based on the based on the data layer object, what to do, right? Which pixels should be enabled, under which conditions, and under which events they'll be enabled on. So this is what you see on the right is basically the definition that we have for the object that we send through the data layer API. Now, the first thing that you see on that object is all the overrides that we're doing for data classification. And we created a standard for the digital data object, which is part of the W3C. And so we're using that to pass on and to create a data layer within IBM, not only for Tealium, but also for all the other applications that we have in our ecosystem. The second thing is we now have instructions to the page. While the page is loading, we have instructions for Tealium to determine when each of the tags will be executed. So we know now if there is a click, that on that click on that specific object, we can trigger a tag. We know that if there is a conversion, we can trigger a tag. And we can have different segmentations that defines whether or not if you're an IBMer or non-IBMer, we can basically retarget you or not. Right. Now, how this looks like now in terms of the end-to-end process, we still have the marketing programs being enabled by the marketing agencies, which we work with. And they still have the spreadsheet. Now, this is very convenient for them, and they had a lot of input on this. They wanted to keep that spreadsheet right there. But what we did, though, is we enable checkpoints and capabilities within the spreadsheet, so we'll be able to load that automatically into the IBM registry, which is basically the solution that Rajesh was mentioning, where we have and we input all the data. And what happens in there is that once we capture all the data, we go and create the JSON objects, which then we send over to the CDN network in Tealium through the API. So we send, for each of the pages that we have a unique identifier, and that unique identifier allows us to, when the page is loaded, we know the unique identifier, we can fetch the file that has all the instructions of what pixels and what data we want to override at runtime. Right? So that's what we did. Now, the next thing that we did is that instead of having all the overhead on all the tags based on domains, we only have now the list of tags that are associated with the vendors and some of the universal tags also. So we reduced the number of tags by 95%. The other thing that we did is that instead of providing a spreadsheet for loading of the categorization data, we have that done directly into the registry, and all of this data then goes over through the CDN, into the CDN as a JSON object. The last thing, and this is something that Rajesh mentioned, is that we wanted to have not only the classification information that we were setting up is basically how we know the business internally. This is how we classify data internally in IBM in terms of business units, group products, and product information. Right? What we wanted to have is to enable personalization to have a better understanding of what the user were looking at. We're using Watson to look at the content of the page and auto-categorize that information. So when we send that information over to the CDN and the page loads, it will know more about the page. It will know more about what is that we're targeting through that page, and that will help us to define and better define personalization. Now, when the user comes in, now they come into IBM, they load the page, we make the call to Tealium. Now, instead of getting those megabytes of data, we basically get only the very small portion of UTAG from Tealium, which will have only one load rule for every one of the tags, which is a Boolean. Now, all the conditions were defined as part of the JSON object that is loaded through the data layer object. So all the logic was in one JSON file. So when we loaded that file, that's the only thing that we load into the page. So the page load, the data payload that we have now is under 100K. And that basically reduced a lot in terms of reduce the payload, but also increase the SEO, and also we increase the overall the page speed from Google. So now we have we basically increased that by 60 points. Now that basically gave us a reduction in terms of how we deploy the pixels in IBM. So we went from 1 week or 2 weeks to 1 hour. This is a fully automated process. We reduced the support that we needed for Tealium in order to enable our solution. And we basically don't need the support personnel for the solution because we don't, it's all automated and self-serving, self-serve. And, we basically have a full self-serve for all the marketing people to enable the pixels and to override any of the classification data that we have that we need for each of the pages within IBM. Now, just to close, and I see that there's no light that came up. Now, this whole story, we started this back in November, and we finished this in February, right? So that was the time for design, development, and deployment of the solution. And since then, we have a full service for all of these. We have not seen any problems. We have not seen any errors. We now have enabled better the mobile platform because our pages are much better. We also have re-enable the marketing program so they can deploy their tags rapidly. And the last thing is that we significantly reduce the cost for operations for this area. And I think that's basically it, and kind of, so I think I'm done. So, so anyway, so that's the story that we have, right? That's our story. There was a big effort with Tealium. We worked with them very closely. So I just wanted to thank you to give us the opportunity to tell the story and, you know, and just see what comes next.
Thank you, and we do encourage you to try this. This is the way to simplify your environment as well. Thanks.
Thank you.